January 1943. The jungle of Guadalcanal was still wet from the night's rain. Steam rose from the soil as the first rays of sun pierced through the trees. Somewhere in that dripping silence, an American rifleman lay so still that even the flies ignored him. His M1903 Springfield rested against a log. Beside it, a small square of broken mirror caught a faint glint of sunlight. To anyone else, it was madness, using a reflection where a sniper's life depended on invisibility. To him, it was bait. 100 yards away, a Japanese marksman waited, convinced the flash was a careless mistake. His finger tightened on the trigger. But the mirror wasn't in a man's hand. It was tied to a stick, angled by wire, half hidden under leaves. The next flash came, deliberate this time. The enemy fired. The bullet shattered glass. The American's shot came half a heartbeat later. Then silence. The jungle went still again, and in that silence, a dangerous idea was born. By early 1943, the U.S. Marines on Guadalcanal had learned a brutal truth. In the jungle, visibility meant death. The dense canopy, waist-high ferns, and endless humidity created a world where the enemy could be 10 feet away, or 100 yards, and remain unseen. Every tree stump looked like a rifle. Every beam of light could be a muzzle flash. Snipers had become the ghosts of the Pacific. Both the Japanese and Americans began adapting to an environment that punished movement and rewarded patience. Japanese marksmen, trained in bush concealment and camouflage from the early days of the China campaign, turned the island's vegetation into a fortress. Their shots often came from the tops of coconut palms or from holes dug deep into hillsides, where even artillery couldn't reach them. The U.S. response was desperate and improvised. Standard Marine doctrine had little to say about counter-sniping in jungles. Infantry platoons learned by blood, adapting on the spot. Spotters crawled through mud looking for muzzle smoke. Some used binoculars, others bayonets, as crude reflectors to catch sunlight and probe for movement. Every discovery cost lives. In this chaotic environment emerged Corporal Thomas "Tom" Berkner, a quiet Midwestern farm boy turned Marine marksman. Before the war, he had spent his days shooting coyotes across open fields in Kansas, judging wind by the sway of grass. Out here, there was no wind to read, only humidity, decay, and the ever-present hum of insects. Berkner had already lost 2 close friends to a sniper hidden near the Matanico River. Their deaths weren't quick. One was hit while tending to a wounded comrade, the other while bringing water back from a stream. Both shots came from the same direction, the same unseen ghost. Commanders called it a stalemate. Berkner called it unfinished business. Late one afternoon, after another failed attempt to locate the enemy, Berkner sat near the perimeter, watching sunlight flicker across a puddle. The reflection caught his eye. The thought came like lightning. What if the light could work both ways? He spent that night experimenting. Using a piece of a broken shaving mirror, he began studying how light bent off the surface when positioned against the earth. A slight change in angle, and the reflection vanished. Another fraction of an inch, and it glinted like a rifle scope. By morning, he had a theory. A way to turn the enemy's aggression against him. But it sounded insane. Deliberately revealing a reflection in sniper territory was asking to be killed. When Berkner shared the idea with his platoon sergeant, the reaction was immediate. "That's suicide, Corporal." But to Berkner, it wasn't madness. It was math. He believed that a single flicker, placed just right, could draw the enemy's eye and trigger finger, long enough for him to trace the source of the counterfire and strike back first. What began as an experiment in light and patience would soon evolve into a deadly precision game, one where a mirror became the trigger. In the weeks that followed, Corporal Berkner refined his idea in secret. He tested mirror fragments during dawn patrols, learning how the Pacific sun behaved differently through mist and rain. He realized that timing was everything. Too much light, and the glint would reveal his position. Too little, and the enemy wouldn't bite. He carried 3 shards of glass in a tobacco tin, wrapped in oilcloth. Each piece was a different size and curvature. One came from a broken Jeep mirror, another from a signal lamp, the third from the handle of a captured Japanese shaving kit. He catalogued their reflection patterns with the patience of a scientist. His fellow Marines watched in uneasy silence. At that stage of the war, snipers operated as lone hunters. They were rarely celebrated. Their job wasn't glorious. It was mathematical death. Each shot had to count. Yet, Berkner's obsession with light traps, as he called them, made him an outsider even among marksmen. "You can't fool a Japanese sniper," one sergeant warned him. "They've been at this longer than we've been alive." Still, Berkner persisted. Guadalcanal was changing. By January 1943, the U.S. had pushed Japanese forces westward, but the snipers remained, haunting the perimeters, killing scouts, medics, and signalmen. Each casualty sowed dread through the ranks. Marines learned to duck at the sound of a fly landing on a leaf. Command began to realize that counter-sniper tactics were as critical as artillery. Coordination, reports from patrols described ATE, particular sniper harassing the ridge, near Point Cruz. He was rumored to be a veteran of Shanghai, an expert who fired once and relocated before anyone could respond. The men called him the Ghost of the Ridge. Berkner volunteered for the mission to eliminate him. Before departure, he approached the platoon armorer and requested thin copper wire and extra camouflage netting. The armorer frowned. "You building a radio, Tom?" Berkner only smiled. That night, under a lean-to shelter, he assembled his mirror rig, a small triangular stand with one reflective surface tilted toward the canopy. A length of wire allowed him to adjust the angle from 20 feet away. When light struck it at the right time, the flash would appear exactly where no man was lying. At dawn on January 27th, he crawled toward the ridge with his spotter, PFC Alan Mendez. The two moved silently, stopping only when they heard the distant cry of a tropical bird, often used as a signal by Japanese scouts. They set up their position near a fallen banyan tree 80 yards from the clearing where the Ghost was believed to operate. As the morning brightened, Berkner positioned the mirror and waited. The jungle's sounds, cicadas, birds, the faint rustle of leaves, became a living clock. Then, the first glint appeared. Mendez tensed. Berkner whispered, "Wait for the echo!" Seconds later, the enemy's rifle cracked. Bark exploded near the decoy. Mendez flinched, but Berkner didn't move. He had seen what he needed. A faint puff of smoke from a shadowed ridge, 10 degrees left of where everyone had been looking. He adjusted his scope, exhaled once, and fired. The Ghost never fired again. That single success would define the reputation of a quiet farm boy, the man who dared to weaponize light. In military history, innovation often arrives from desperation, not design. Corporal Berkner's mirror plan was a direct answer to the battlefield's most ancient riddle. How do you kill what you cannot see? His tactic was deceptively simple. By placing small mirrors or glass fragments in strategic locations and manipulating them with wire, he could project false positions, light flashes that appeared like the accidental glint of a rifle scope or binocular lens. For enemy snipers, trained to seek such reflections, the instinctive response was to shoot immediately. That split-second reaction gave away their true position. It was psychological warfare condensed into a single beam of sunlight. Berkner's approach bridged two disciplines rarely linked at the time: marksmanship and deception. Traditional Marine sharpshooting relied on patience and stealth. His method introduced bait and calculation. It was closer to chess than shooting. He understood that the Japanese marksmen weren't reckless. They followed patterns, firing only at what appeared to be careless exposure. The mirror became a test of discipline. Whoever hesitated first lost. Word of his success spread quietly across his unit. Commanders noted his results. Fewer sniper casualties, more confirmed kills. But the method was controversial. Some officers dismissed it as luck. Others feared imitation could get men killed if used without precision. To Berkner, precision was the point. Every reflection had to be calibrated to the hour, the terrain, and the sun's angle. He would study the sky before every mission, tracking when light filtered through gaps in the canopy. He could tell by instinct when a glint would last 2 seconds or 5. He began teaching his spotter, Mendez, how to set decoys while staying hidden. They experimented with using puddles, empty ration cans, even helmet liners filled with water to mimic reflections. Each adaptation carried risk. Every time they drew attention, they invited death. But as the campaign dragged on, their results spoke louder than doubts. Patrols that once lost men to unseen shooters now returned intact. The mirror trick had become more than a tactic. It was a tool for survival. Psychologists who later studied sniper warfare in the Pacific noted how the illusion of control mattered as much as marksmanship. Berkner's technique gave soldiers something tangible to rely on, a countermeasure in a fight defined by invisibility. It turned fear into focus. His comrades began calling him the glass ghost, a quiet nod to both his method and his refusal to take credit. When asked by a reporter months later how many kills he had, Berkner simply replied, "Enough to let my men walk upright again." Yet, beyond the battlefield, success lay a deeper transformation, the birth of tactical deception as a survival art. In jungles where technology faltered and radar meant nothing, the play of light and shadow decided life or death. And in that game, Berkner had learned to control the sun itself. Sniping in the Pacific demanded more than accuracy. It required endurance, isolation, and an almost meditative patience. For men like Berkner, the battlefield was not a clash of armies, but a war of nerves measured in heartbeats. Most Marines dreaded the hours before dawn, when the jungle came alive, but visibility vanished. That was when Japanese marksmen hunted most effectively, using faint outlines and rustling movement as cues. Berkner, however, learned to embrace those moments. He would arrive at his position while the world was still gray, long before the first birds stirred. There, lying motionless in the mud, he learned what silence truly meant. His spotter, PFC Mendez, later recalled in an after-action report that Berkner could stay so still. "I thought he'd fallen asleep." But he wasn't asleep. He was listening. He claimed the jungle spoke in rhythms. Insects quieted before movement, birds returned after death, and the air pressure itself seemed to shift seconds before a rifle cracked. That sensory focus was what made the mirror plan work. The tactic wasn't just mechanical, it was psychological. Berkner wasn't fighting the enemy's body. He was fighting his expectation. The Japanese sniper believed he was in control, watching, waiting for a mistake. But the moment he fired at the false reflection, that control shattered. The hunter became the hunted. The moral weight of that shift was heavy. Snipers often carried guilt long after their missions. They operated outside the normal rhythm of combat. Invisible, uncelebrated, sometimes mistrusted. Killing unseen enemies felt detached, almost surgical. For Berkner, the mirror was not only a weapon, but a burden. He knew every reflection he set was an invitation to die. After Guadalcanal, his methods spread quietly among specialized Marine Scout sniper units. They called them light traps or ghost baits. Manuals would later reference them in training under visual deception techniques, though never mentioning his name. It was too unconventional, too unorthodox for official doctrine. Yet those who served beside him remembered. They spoke of his calm under fire, his refusal to shoot unless absolutely certain, and his strange habit of collecting bits of glass after each engagement. He said the mirror saved lives, one corporal recalled. He treated it like a cross. In retrospect, historians see Berkner's method as an early form of optical counterintelligence, the blending of camouflage, reflection control, and predictive targeting. What he discovered instinctively in 1943 would later influence techniques in Korea and Vietnam, where snipers used smoke, mirrors, and decoys to manipulate enemy line of sight. But in the thick jungles of Guadalcanal, none of that future mattered. For Berkner, it was personal. Every reflection he set was a reply to the men he had lost. Every kill was both revenge and redemption. In a war defined by firepower, he had proven that light, fragile, fleeting, intangible, could be deadlier than bullets. And it was this revelation that would soon lead him to the most dangerous operation of his life, one that even his superiors called suicidal. By February 1943, the battle for Guadalcanal was nearing its brutal end. The Japanese, cornered and starving, had begun retreating toward Cape Esperance. But the jungle still killed men long after the front had shifted. Scattered snipers and rear guards stayed behind to delay pursuit. Ghosts left to bleed the Americans one bullet at a time. One such strong point overlooked a narrow ravine near the Lunga River. For days, it had pinned down Marine patrols, halting supply movements and wounding several men. Scouts reported muzzle flashes but couldn't locate the nest. Every attempt to flank it ended in silence, and another dead Marine. When orders came to clear the position, Corporal Berkner volunteered without hesitation. His commander hesitated. "You've done enough of these, Tom. That one's a death pit." Berkner's reply was quiet. "Then it needs someone who knows how to die carefully." He requested no backup, only Mendez, his trusted spotter. Together, they moved out before dawn. The rain had stopped, leaving a mist thick enough to swallow a man whole. As they crawled through the wet underbrush, Berkner studied the terrain like a map etched in mud. The ridge sloped north to south, with the enemy firing from a patch of thick bamboo. He could see faint grooves in the soil, spent shells recently ejected. Whoever was up there was still watching. They reached a fallen tree and set up their position 30 yards from the ravine. Berkner unwrapped his final piece of mirror, the largest one, a curved fragment from an aircraft signal plate. He rigged it to a small stick, fastening the wire around his wrist. Mendez frowned. "You sure about this? We're close enough he could hit us blind." Berkner didn't answer. He adjusted the angle slightly until a thin beam of sunlight cut through the mist and bounced toward the bamboo line. The light flickered once, then twice. Seconds passed. The jungle exhaled. Then came the first shot. Bark splintered above Berkner's head. The sniper was close, his timing perfect. Berkner noted the angle. Low, left, steady. He waited, then tilted the mirror again. The second shot struck where the first reflection had been. This time he caught the muzzle flash. "Got him," Berkner whispered. He adjusted his Springfield scope, exhaled, and squeezed the trigger. A single echo rolled down the ravine. Birds erupted from the trees. Then, nothing. They waited 10 minutes before moving. When they reached the enemy position, they found a camouflaged foxhole lined with leaves, the Japanese rifle still balanced on its bipod. The shooter had been hit clean through the scope. Mendez stood in stunned silence. "You killed him with his own sight," Berkner only nodded. "That's what light does, Mendez. It shows the truth." The victory at the ravine spread quietly through the regiment. To the men who had lost friends there, Berkner's success was more than vengeance. It was closure. But among officers, his methods raised uneasy questions. His commanding captain called it reckless ingenuity. Another referred to it as calculated suicide that somehow worked. Yet, word reached higher headquarters. The intelligence section at Henderson Field requested a demonstration. For the first time, Berkner's mirror setup was examined formally by Marine observers, not as a curiosity, but as a tactical model. He arrived at the range with Mendez and a handful of salvaged materials: a canteen mirror, copper wire, and 2 bamboo sticks. He set it up at 70 yards from the firing line and replicated the jungle's partial shade using palm fronds. When sunlight broke through, the reflection danced briefly across the target boards. An observer instinctively raised his rifle. The movement was immediate, involuntary, just as Berkner had predicted. He explained in quiet, steady words how the trap relied not on light itself, but on human instinct. "You don't shoot at what you see," he said. "You shoot at what you think you saw." That line would later be quoted in field reports on deception tactics. After the demonstration, senior officers debated. Some argued that such methods violated the principle of concealment. Others saw potential. Eventually, Berkner was authorized to train a small detachment of scout snipers in his system, an unofficial experiment under operational secrecy. But he never saw it as a breakthrough. To him, it was unfinished business. In early March, during a mopping-up operation near Mount Austin, a final pocket of resistance trapped a Marine platoon under sniper fire from an elevated ridge. Communication lines were down, and artillery couldn't risk friendly fire. Once again, Berkner volunteered to advance alone. It was near dusk when he reached the lower slope. The sun was sinking behind clouds, no light to reflect, no mirrors to bait with. Mendez begged him to wait for morning. Berkner refused. "He's watching us right now," he said. "Darkness won't save him." He moved forward without a spotter. Witnesses later said he crawled for nearly an hour under fire, advancing inches at a time. When the final rifle report echoed, it came from his position. And then silence. At dawn, search teams found him near a shattered mirror, his rifle beside a fallen Japanese sniper. Both men had fired almost simultaneously. Berkner's bullet had struck true. So had his enemies. He was buried at sea 2 days later. His mirror, recovered and wrapped in cloth, was kept in the company's footlocker for the rest of the campaign. No medals were given. No official citation recorded the trick that saved so many lives. But the story traveled, carried quietly among snipers across the Pacific, of the man who turned sunlight into a weapon. In the days after Berkner's death, the jungle grew strangely quiet. The men who had served beside him described it as the calm after a storm. The ridge that had once echoed with sniper fire now stood silent, marked only by spent cartridges and a single piece of cracked glass lying half-buried in the mud. Word of his final mission reached command at Henderson Field by the week's end. His platoon sergeant filed a short report. Corporal Thomas Berkner executed counter-sniper operations with exceptional initiative. Killed in action, March 3, 1943. It was a sterile line, stripped of meaning. But among the ranks, stories spread like wind through palm leaves. They told of the farm boy who used sunlight as a weapon. They spoke of mirrors dangling from trees, flashes that drew out invisible enemies, and the calm, steady hand that waited for them. In April 1943, a field manual revision quietly added a new subheading: Optical Counter-Deception, Principles of Reflected Light. The section contained no names, but its content matched Berkner's method precisely. It outlined how reflections could be used to locate, bait, or mislead enemy snipers, accompanied by a single cautionary line. This practice carries extreme risk and should only be undertaken by experienced marksmen. The technique reached other theaters by word of mouth. Scouts in Bougainville experimented with polished canteens. In New Guinea, some used puddles after rain. In every case, the same principle applied: weaponizing the enemy's instinct to strike first. To military historians, this marked one of the earliest recorded uses of passive visual baiting in modern combat, an improvised tactic decades ahead of its time. Long before infrared sensors or optical jammers, a single Marine had discovered the psychological fragility of human sight. For the men of Guadalcanal, however, the legacy was simpler. When his platoon rotated out, they left a small token near the ridge where he had fallen. A mirror fragment tied to a bamboo stalk with a strip of field cloth. Beneath it, someone carved into the bark, "He saw what others feared to look at." The jungle reclaimed it months later, but the story endured. Though no medal bore his name, those who had fought under his reflection carried it forward. A memory of a man who found genius inside the madness of war. Months later, as the Guadalcanal campaign drew to its end, few of the men who had served there spoke openly about what they had seen. The Pacific War was far from over, and new battles, Bougainville, Tarawa, Peleliu, were already consuming headlines. Yet, within the close circles of Marine scout snipers, Berkner's technique survived quietly, passed from memory to memory like a secret handshake. Reports surfaced of similar mirror traps being used in the Solomons and later in the Philippines. The concept evolved. Mirrors replaced by metal shards, tin fragments, even small pools of collected rainwater. It wasn't official doctrine, but it worked. And every time an enemy sniper fell for the flicker of light, someone whispered his name. Back in the United States, his family received a modest letter and a folded flag. The document mentioned bravery under fire, but omitted the details. His younger brother, a machinist in Topeka, later said, "Tom wasn't after medals. He just wanted to make sure the next man came home." Years later, a Marine historian reviewing field manuals for the Korean War found scattered references to light deception for sniper countermeasures. None credited Berkner, but the resemblance was unmistakable. Techniques using reflective baits to lure enemy shooters appeared again in Vietnam, often with cameras or periscopes attached. A technology-driven evolution of what had begun with a piece of broken glass in the mud of Guadalcanal. To those who study military innovation, the lesson was profound. Progress in warfare rarely comes from design bureaus or laboratories. It often begins with a single soldier, alone in the field, facing a problem that theory cannot solve. In that sense, Berkner's suicidal plan was not just a moment of courage, it was the embodiment of adaptation itself. In 1952, the Marine Corps introduced the Scout Sniper Instructor School, formalizing advanced sniper tactics. Among its early teachings were exercises in visual discipline, learning to distinguish genuine reflections from decoys. The irony was silent, but unmistakable. The very technique that had once been dismissed as madness had become part of the training to survive. Decades later, when veterans gathered and spoke of Guadalcanal, they remembered the heat, the insects, and the endless fear of unseen rifles. But every now and then, someone would mention a story of a quiet man who had once outsmarted death with a mirror. And in that reflection, his legacy endured. History often remembers those who advanced under fire, who raised flags or commanded divisions. But wars are also shaped by those who thought quietly. Men like Corporal Thomas Berkner, who turned an impossible situation into an idea that outlived him. His plan had been called Suicidal because it defied instinct. Soldiers are trained to avoid exposure, to hide from the enemy's gaze. Berkner inverted that rule. He invited attention, and in doing so, discovered something deeper about human nature. In every sniper's duel lies a paradox. Both sides wait for the other to make a mistake. Berkner learned that mistakes could be created, not by force, but by illusion. His mirrors reflected not just light, but trust. The trust every soldier places in what his eyes tell him. And once that trust was broken, the battlefield itself changed. Long after the Pacific War ended, the principle endured. Modern warfare would adopt the same logic in new forms: decoy flares, radar ghosts, infrared traps, all designed to confuse the mind before the weapon. Berkner's experiment in the jungle was the primitive ancestor of a new philosophy. Control perception. And you control the fight, yet, beyond tactics and innovation, there was something human in his story. The calm defiance of a man who believed that courage was not about surviving, but about thinking clearly when death seemed certain. A mirror, fragile and temporary, became his legacy. It reminded those who came after him that even in war, a place defined by destruction, creativity could still save lives. The jungle that once swallowed his reflection has long since grown over. But somewhere, in the archives of forgotten field notes and uncredited tactics, his light still flickers, quiet, brief, and precise, just as it was on that morning in 1943, when one man aimed through silence and let the sun do the killing.